Zachor asher salach Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey. After you left Egypt, how undeterred by fear of God, he surprised you on the march when you were famished and weary and cut down all the stragglers in your rear. Therefore, when God grants you safety from all your enemies around you in the land that Hashem your God is giving you as a hereditary portion, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Timched zecha Amalek mitachat hashamayim lo tishkach. Do not forget. 3 verses, as we heard, comprise today's special maftir from this Shabbat Zachor, our Shabbat of Remembrance. The paradoxical command to both erase memory and to remember is haunting every year as we enter Purim and contend on some psychological deep level beneath the festivities with a story that is about attempted genocide. Purim is both delightful and it's also terrifying, but the Megillah is a fantasy, right? Satire, it's a cautionary tale, except as our people know too well when it's not. Zachor et asher salach Amalek. We dare not forget. Today is day 168. We are just over 2 weeks from the 6-month mark, nearly 6 months since thousands of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad fighters stormed over a sovereign border, nearly 6 months since 1,200 women, men, children, babies, the elderly, Jews, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, atheists were slaughtered. Nearly 6 months from an attack that saw the worst kind of brutality meted out deliberately and viciously against a mostly civilian population. Systematic sexual violence, decapitation, mutilation, incineration. Nearly 6 months since hundreds were taken into captivity in Gaza, kept in squalid conditions, medicines withheld, kept from Red Cross oversight and intervention, further brutalized and victimized. 134 hostages remain. Some have been murdered. Most, we hope, are still alive. The oldest is in his 70s. The youngest is 1 year old. Oh. Zachor et asher salach Amalek. As Jonathan Safran Foer writes in Everything is Illuminated, Jews have 6 senses: touch, taste, sight, smell, hearing, memory. The Jew is pricked by a pin and remembers other pins. When a Jew encounters a pin, he asks, what does it remember like? How do we engage our sense of memory? One way my family did this year is through the Taste Like Home website, which offers favorite cookie and hamantashen recipes from Israeli hostages. For our Mishloach Manot, Miriam and Shamir made Dolev Yehud's doce de leche balls and Almog Meir Yan's chocolate chip hamantashen. Dolev is 35, grew up on kibbutz near Oz, is married and has 4 children, the youngest of whom was born 10 days after Dolev was kidnapped. Dolev has never met his infant daughter, Dor. Almog is 21 years old. He was taken from the Nova Music Festival. He was supposed to start a long-term job on October 8th. Instead, he is holed up somewhere in God knows what condition, surely not enjoying his favorite hamantashen recipe this Purim. In 10 days, I'll be in Israel, standing on the field where Almog was taken. Then I suspect I'll understand a bit more what it remembers like. Zachor et asher salach Amalek. In January, lawyers representing South Africa stood at The Hague and accused Israel of genocide. Among their so-called evidence was the use of rhetoric involving Amalek by Benjamin Netanyahu and other politicians. Here's what I believe. No matter how I feel about Bibi, nor the extreme and dangerous coalition he leads, the case by South Africa against Israel is not only fallacious, it's libelous. And like blood libels of old, it's being used as justification to target, intimidate, and harm Jews and Jewish communities the world over. Shlomit Ravitsky Torpaz was one of many Jewish voices back in January challenging South African claims. Thousands of years of metaphor, she explains, in the times of Israel are hardly evidence of genocide. Those who are steeped in Jewish culture do not hear a call for annihilation or genocide when they hear the name Amalek, she writes, but rather a metaphor as an expression of utter psychological shock in the face of pure evil. She wrote what so many of us were thinking. The invocation of Amalek is about naming evil when we see it. Amalek is the archetype of evil in our tradition. It's the language we use to describe the indescribable. South Africa's legal team wants to claim the stories about Amalek are about Jewish people's response, equating Gaza with our Haftorah, Shmuel Aleph, or I guess with chapter 9 of the Megillah. But this is not only a mischaracterization of the war in Gaza, but a dangerous misread of these texts. The danger of Amalek, of Haman, is real. The response in the Megillah, for example, is fantasy. It's Tarantino-esque revenge porn. Am I concerned that extreme voices from numerous Israeli settlers, rabbis, and even some especially repugnant cabinet ministers have misused, weaponized these sources and inspired, even incited violence? Absolutely. And I hope all of us are concerned about that. But that does not make that fantasy IDF policy in the war. I see no evidence of that. If I do, I'll let you know. Amalek is about the shape of evil. He's a phantom who takes human form when too often throughout history they've come for us. And on October 7th, they came for us. By land, by sea, by air, and they slaughtered us in numbers not seen for nearly 80 years. And they brutalized us in ways reminiscent of 1903. Do you know what happened in 1903? It was the Kishinev pogrom. Before Kristallnacht, there was Kishinev, explains journalist Peter Steinfels in a New York Times piece. Kishinev, writes Stanford's Stephen Zipperstein in his 2018 book, Pogrom, Kishinev and the Tilt of History. Kishinev almost instantly became shorthand for barbarism, for behavior akin to the worst medieval atrocities. Do you know how many Jews were murdered at Kishinev? 49. 49. And do you know when Kishinev happened? Any ideas? So it was in April. That's right, next month marks 121 years since 49 Jews were raped and tortured and slaughtered in staggeringly vicious ways. And it marks 6 months since 1,200 mostly Jewish human beings were dealt the same fate in the Gaza envelope. While I hesitate to call October 7th a pogrom because it implies a level of defenselessness which was surely apparent that day, but is not endemic to Israeli life, there's another way in which October 7th, 2023 and April 19th through 21st, 1903 are similar. The Hamas attack was timed to maximize suffering on Shabbat and Simchat Torah, a Jewish holiday, much like the attack on Yom Kippur 50 years earlier. The Russian mob that attacked the Jews of Kishinev did so on the last night of Passover, which was not coincidentally Easter Sunday. A blood libel, the false claim that Jews murder children and use their blood for Passover matzah, inspired pogromists to murder Jews over a century ago. And the murder of Jews 6 months ago inspired another libel, that the occupation is to blame, that Israelis had it coming, that tiny children and peace activists deserve their blood spilled for the sin of living on our ancestral land. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek. Remember how undeterred by fear of God, he surprised you on the march when you were famished and weary and cut down the stragglers in your rear. But here's the real distinction between the pitiful justification of Russian and other apologists for Kishinev and the apologists for October 7th, who would attempt to justify their accusations of Israeli genocide while conveniently ignoring Hamas's stated and acted upon genocidal ambitions. The difference is that various Christian communities over hundreds of years have used supersessionist anti-Semitic rhetoric to vilify and then target and murder Jews, especially this time of year when accusations of deicide are prevalent. Because the problem with Christian anti-Jewish polemics is that, guess what? Jews are real people, living in countless contexts now and then under Christian regimes. We are not just a foil for Jesus or Paul on the pages of some ancient book. So praying to a God who rejects Jews, who supplants our Bible with a so-called new covenant, who views our beautiful, dynamic, evolving Jewish tradition in the most reductive manner, well, we shouldn't be surprised that these polemics in the hands and voices of certain narrow-minded people have led to violence of the worst kind. But what of our polemics? We have a bunch. I'm not going to speak about all of them, but at least regarding the one from our maftir, I'm fairly confident that innocent Amalekites are safe. There are not Amalekites around. They are a metaphor. Amalek is the Jewish boogeyman. As Torpaz writes in her Times of Israel piece, Maimonides clarified already in the 12th century, there was no longer any ability to identify the descendants of Amalek who were scattered, and therefore the commandment is nullified. Here's the thing. I'm tired. I'm really tired of people telling us how to read our own texts. Which of course begs a question. Who is Amalek? Not to South African lawyers at The Hague, not to SJP activists on college campuses, but to us, to the Jewish community and our robust interpretive tradition. On this Shabbat Zachor, what is remembering Amalek meant to remember like? I've spoken before about the 19th century Malbim's assertion that of all the legitimate reasons for fighting a war, Amalek subscribes to none of them. That's what makes him especially evil. And I do think this quality applies to Hamas. I've taught in other settings about Rashi's assertion that Amalek's true evil is how he inspires subsequent evil in his wake, in word and deed, and that characterization is apt as well. As just one data point, Hillel International reports a 700% increase. 700% increase in anti-Semitic incidents on campus this year compared to last. But another way we Jews read our own texts is not only about the pernicious behavior of those who take aim at Jewish communities, because Amalek has never been just the bad guys who are out to get us. How many of you watched Jonathan Glazer's, yes, I'm going there, Jonathan Glazer's acceptance speech from the Oscars? Who saw it or at least read the text? Okay. I didn't love it. You might not be surprised. You also might be surprised, though, that I didn't think it was evil incarnate. I think Glazer was trying to use his platform to raise awareness about the hijacking of his Jewish identity and the events of the Shoah to make claims about Israel-Palestine with which he disagrees. I think his conclusions are wrong. I think they're simplistic and naive. I think he plays the useful idiot for those who want to justify October 7th, just as easily as he tries to push back against those who would justify October 8th and anything and everything that the IDF does in response. But I get why he said what he said. And MS, on some level, I admire his courage. The part that I cannot get behind, though, the part of his speech which I found quite frankly offensive, is his role in characterizing the subject of his film. I asked how many of you saw the Oscar speech. How many of you saw the movie? So what's the movie? It's called The Zone of Interest, which won the Oscar, and that's why for foreign language film, and that's why he was there speaking. So I saw the movie. I thought it was excellent. It was a haunting and poignant examination of what Hannah Arendt called evil's banality. You'll remember that Arendt covers the Eichmann trial in a series of articles in the New Yorker. These become her 1963 book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report on the banality of evil. Arendt's basic thesis is that while there are certainly depraved villains among the Nazi hierarchy, the true scale of the Holocaust was brought about by people like Adolf Eichmann, who was not an ideologue or really a fundamentalist, but a bureaucrat, motivated less by irrepressible hatred of Jews and more by self-interest and self-preservation. Glazer's film, The Zone of Interest, does not make such claims about Auschwitz Commandant Rudolf Hess, who, unlike Eichmann, probably was a sociopath. But it meticulously depicts proximity to evil, voyeuristically, how Hess, his wife, and 5 children frolicked within their beautifully cultivated garden and in the nearby stream, each of which abutted the imposing walls of the most notorious death camp in human history. The Zone of Interest genius is that unlike a good horror film where you rarely or never quite see the monster, here you witness the monster in sharp relief while only getting glimpses of his monstrous deeds. Ash and body parts in the water, smoke rising on the horizon, the muffled sounds of gunfire provide a constant backdrop, a soundtrack for the Hess family's bucolic lives. So what was Glazer's great sin? It was to reduce the subject matter of his film to a slogan, to make the Shoah about October 7th and the war that has unfolded since. Paradoxically, by arguing against the hijacking of identities, he hijacks his own movie and renders it a caricature of past events, instead of allowing it to be what it is, a cautionary tale about human depravity. Which brings me to the other most sobering interpretation of Amalek. Because the real danger of Amalek and the real power of invoking an evergreen archetype based on a bygone enemy is that Amalek is not obviously analogous to any one person or people. Rabbi Elijah Shochet lays out the argument in his 1991 book, Amalek, The Enemy Within. The author asks, regarding the most troubling details of the Amalek sources, why the need for total eradication of this particular enemy? Why the need for the eternal battle? Why the need for the Lord to be personally involved? Finally, why the Lord's apparent need for human assistance in vanquishing Amalek? As the Zohar phrases it, the battle was not great because of the warriors or the weapons, but because of the tremendous spiritual forces that were called into play. For Amalek, Shochet explains, is more than an evil nation. Amalek is more than all evil nations. Amalek is evil incarnate. It is not merely an external foe, but it is rather built into the inner structure of the universe. It is the inner foe residing within the human heart. Plainly put, Amalek, he writes, the enemy is us. I began my drasha today citing Hamas and their depravity. I called them Amalek. I stand by the characterization. Hamas has behaved and seems determined to behave like Haman and his ilk. But not all manifestations of Amalek are so acute as Yahya Sinwar, Ismail Haniya, Rudolf Hess, Adolf Eichmann. Amalek, teaches our tradition, is also to be found in Jews who would instrumentalize and weaponize our own texts against the values of a living and loving God. So in that sense, yes, Itamar Ben-Gvir, Bezalel Smotrich, these are manifestations of the same impulse that motivates those who have attacked and brutalized our people. When settler youth terrorize and brutalize Palestinians in the West Bank, that's Amalek. When Benjamin Netanyahu provided a hechsher for the Kahanis to run roughshod over Israel's democracy, that's Amalek too. When anyone tries to label a people, a race, an entire territory as the enemy of goodness, or God's adversary, well, that's Amalek as well. This is not to say that all expressions of this evil impulse are the same, nor the same order of magnitude, nor are to be vanquished in the same manner. Information, education, love, these are powerful weapons against Amalek. What I'm trying to say is that our tradition has always understood we must be at least as cautious of callousness, wickedness, hatred within our own hearts, our communities, and our societies as we are of these forces within our enemies. Glaser is right that we need to be careful. To paraphrase Nietzsche, not to become the monsters we are fighting. But he seems to have missed the fact that the Shoah, Hitler's reign, did not end because of wishful thinking or really good movies. It ended because the Allies were victorious. And victory came, yes, at a huge cost. Candidly, I do not know. I do not know because I am not in the war, nor have I ever fought in a war, nor planned and executed a war, if the results of this war will be worth their costs. I hope and pray that they will be. And if and when there is a ceasefire that will allow for the return of all of our hostages and a path to preventing future October 7s, and yes, a state of Palestine, halavai, I'm all for it. What I'm clear about, though, from our special maftir this week, what I'm clear about from the Israeli and Palestinian failures predating October 7th is that evil must not be accommodated but defeated. All we can do is our very best to fight for good and peace, to love and pursue justice, and to examine and confront Amalek wherever it may be. This is the demand of memory. This, I believe, is the mandate of Shabbat Zachor. Shabbat Shalom.